Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell facing now a criminal referral as scrutiny ramps up over the $2.5 billion renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. U.S. Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte did his own investigation outside of the building to gauge what progress has been made. Watch.
All right, everyone, they're here getting ready to put up some scaffolding. As I said, they have concrete that they're putting in, got some new steel that they're putting in, some new rebar. You know, I've spent my whole life in construction. It's very hard for me to believe that you could spend $2.5 billion just on concrete and steel and some of this other stuff that they're doing. Back at another gate, with middle of the day here, you'd think a lot of construction workers would be here. This is, I guess, entry and exit. I don't see any workers in this area, so we only saw 6 workers over there, only saw a handful over there. Where's Jerome Powell? Where did Jerome Powell put the $2.5 billion? This guy's supposed to be the money manager for the world's biggest economy, and it doesn't even look like he can run a construction site. So something doesn't smell right here. Something is very, very bad.
The president praised Pulte on X days before writing this. Congratulations to William Pulte on the outstanding job he's doing. Keep moving forward, William. Don't let the radical left weaklings stop you. Joining me now is the man himself, Federal Housing FHFA Director Bill Pulte. Bill, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. What was your takeaway after what you saw yesterday? And you will be taking an official tour of the Fed building tomorrow with OMB Director Russ Vought and White House Deputy Chief of Staff James Blair. What are you expecting? What do you want to see?
Well, we have the most popular president in history. He just won a landslide mandate from the American people to be president of the United States. He's literally the most popular president we've ever had. But we have one guy in the form of Jerome Powell who just thinks that he is maybe more important than the economy and more important than everybody else by being a stubborn mule, as President Trump has called him. So it's a big problem, and Jerome Powell needs to resign. As it relates to the building, you know, they just built the Buffalo Bills Stadium for $2.2 billion, but somehow Jerome Powell has spent $2.5 billion. I think by the time it's done, it's going to be way higher than that. So I think there needs to be an investigation. I think that maybe he lied to Congress. I think things are going to get a lot worse for Jerome Powell, and it'd just be better off if he resigned.
You know, a lot of people worry when the independence of the Fed is shaken, and I want to get your take on what's cause to fire him. I mean, if he's spending $2.5 billion and he could actually account for that and prove why he needed that money to update these buildings, which is what he's saying, would you be able to use that as cause to actually fire him?
Well, I don't want to get any specifics, and I would refer you to the White House and to the lawyers. I would say, from my perspective, I do believe that there is for cause. But I can say personally that, you know, I've been in construction my whole life. I have never seen a construction site like this one. I mean, it really doesn't make any sense. They're taking down the marble. They're taking down the steel. I mean, these are very durable building materials. That's what they are. It doesn't make any sense what has gone on. And frankly, I think we need to look into who's behind these contracts, who knew what when. How much involvement did Jerome Powell have, or how much involvement didn't he have? I mean, it's very concerning. You know, you got a guy who's supposedly in charge of our entire economy. I mean, I'm in charge of $7.8 trillion at Fannie and Freddie. You have an obligation. You know, if we have a building renovation at Fannie or Freddie, you know, that reflects poorly on you. And this guy, somehow, he wants to get a hall pass for spending $2.5 billion on a government building. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think we're in the beginning innings of understanding what's going on here.
Well, it's really interesting because President Trump has talked so much about the debt and deficits that we face, $36 trillion in debt, $2 trillion in deficits, and he wants rates to go lower to lower the cost of this capital. But Chairman Powell keeps talking about the fact that his mandate is inflation and jobs growth. Shouldn't he also be looking at the cost of this capital, given the fact that we are spending more on interest just to hold on to this debt and carry it over than we do on defense spending?
Well, of course, but he should also be listening to President Trump. Not only is he the most popular president, but he's probably 100 times more successful in business and in life than Jerome Powell. But somehow Jerome Powell thinks that he knows better than the President of the United States, who's the best businessman that's ever been in the office. You know, one of the only ones who's ever been in office. It's totally crazy. But this is a guy who's very arrogant. He's very pompous. And frankly, I think he's going to resign, Maria. I think it's just a matter of time.
So you think he'll resign before May, which is when the term officially ends?
I do think so. I think that, you look at what's going to be coming out, I think, with regard to this building. You look at what he's done. I mean, he's really holding the American people hostage with these rates being high. I oversee Fannie and Freddie, Maria, and I can tell you it is absolutely hurting people's ability to get a mortgage. You have the Fed funds rate at 4.5%. Meanwhile, inflation for the last 3 months is running at 1.6%. President Trump has absolutely crushed inflation. I mean, when we had President Biden, this thing was totally out of control. President Trump, in a matter of months, did almost a miracle with getting inflation down. Yet the Fed funds rate is not reflecting that. So this is a big issue for the American people. I think the president will not stop. He should not stop. It's not in his nature to stop. He will win. The president will win, and this economy will boom. It's just I hope that it happens sooner rather than later.
And it is very true, Adam Johnson, that right now the macro story is booming due to President Trump's policies. And this priority that the president has on growth. The one area that is still shaky is housing. And, it's a supply issue, but it's also a rate issue.
Yes.
Bill is right on the rate.
And that's exactly the whole problem. You got to get rates down because you cut rates, and all of a sudden, home affordability goes up.
Right.
So that's the one sort of block in the wall that bothers all of us, and I think that's what we're hearing from Mr. Pulte.
Yeah,
so yes.
And he's complaining about President Trump's tariffs. Meanwhile, they just resulted in a budget surplus for the month of June.
And I'll tell you this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maria, one of the things that's crazy is that you have the situation where he says, oh, tariffs, are causing inflation. He has no data to support it. Nothing. He says, oh, we're going to be data dependent. He has no data. He's hallucinating this stuff. I will say one thing that's also concerning, Maria, is that because interest rates are high, it actually increases inflation in home building, from my perspective, from the different CEOs I'm speaking with. Because what happens are when interest rates are high, the builders constrict supply because they're concerned about selling the inventory. And so that's what's also concerning about this is he's having enormous effects, not just on home building, housing, but also car loans, credit loans. And frankly, if he probably had a credit loan or a credit card or a car loan, maybe he would care. But this is really hurting real people. Well,
people all over the map have told me they do think that Jay Powell is political. And I know that President Trump has called him too late, Powell, because he's not cutting interest rates. But he's also called him political. And it's hard to think otherwise, given the fact that he did cut rates right before the last election. I don't know if we needed to see a cut then, but right after the election, when President Trump won, he was done cutting rates. Realtors and developers in New York City are warning now about New York City mayoral candidate Zoran Mamdani's housing policies, Bill. They say that they could create further housing shortages in New York. Mamdani's policies include a freeze on rent, building 200,000 new publicly subsidized housing units, and fast-tracking affordable housing projects. Bill, your reaction?
Well, this guy in New York, this is a consequence of people like Jay Powell, right? Because the constituents of New York are very upset because they can't afford housing. And so they come up with crazy ideas like what's going on in New York because people like Jay Powell keep the Fed's funds rate at 4.5%, keep mortgage rates artificially high when inflation's at 1.6%. So in some ways, Jerome Powell's policies are actually inflaming some of this stuff. So a Fed chair can't come soon enough. I think the Fed chair will be able to reduce rates dramatically. The Fed chair will have to reduce rates dramatically, and I think you will see housing get resolved. I think you'll have the best housing market you've ever had in this country, and I think you'll have an economy that will boom, the likes of which we've never seen. I mean, Trump #1 was amazing, but I think Trump #2 economy will just be otherworldly. We won't believe it, in my view.
All right, let's check rates right now, because mortgage rates right now are sitting at 6.75% as of last week. That's slightly up from the week before. Redfin is reporting that new home listings have hit the lowest level since October of 2023, falling 3.2% in June. So you've got a rate problem, but you've also got a supply problem. Existing home sales ticking higher from the month before, Bill. How would you assess the housing market right now?
Well, people are optimistic that President Trump has come in and crushed inflation. There was a whole debate about what will happen with drywall, what will happen with lumber, what will happen with roofing supplies. And if you recall, people were saying, oh, it's going to impact housing. We haven't seen that in the data. It hasn't. Inflation hasn't happened in construction as a result of the tariffs. So he has absolutely not only won on the tariffs, but he's crushed inflation. So now really the only thing is this Fed's funds rate. I mean, why is it at 4.5%? Just mathematically speaking, right? Like Jerome Powell, who's a lawyer, and maybe that's why he doesn't understand math, but, he's supposed to be a smart guy. interest rates 4.5% when inflation's at 1.6%, it's almost like he's trying to crash President Trump's economy. He won't be successful, but it's almost like he's trying to do that. And it's very frustrating because at Fannie and Freddie, we have people all day trying to underwrite loans, trying to get, trying to get the housing market booming again. And you got a guy sitting up there in a $2.5 billion renovation, which is a mess, holding these rates way too high.
Yeah, well, it certainly doesn't appear that Jay Powell wants to help President Trump anytime soon. With regard to policy on his end. Bill, it's great to see you. We'll be watching your work
too.
as usual. Thank you, sir. Bill Pulte joining us.